Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Denver Dzogchen podcast. I'm here once again with Joseph Wagner, and we are going to continue with our series on the Ngondro, the inner Ngondro. Last time we covered refuge and bodhicitta, and maybe we didn't really do bodhicitta, so maybe we need to do bodhicitta.
We can talk about Bodhichitta.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we were thinking Vajrasattva, but we didn't combine those. Even though those are combined in the practice often, we didn't combine them in the episode. So we will talk about bodhicitta, which is so important. Of course, every Lama you've ever met hammers on this, and it's for good reason. So I think there's no more perfect place to start than there. Joe, if you want to take us off with what is bodhicitta and why is it so important?
Well, Bodhi means the achievement of enlightenment, and Chitta means heart or mind. So Bodhicitta is the very essence of enlightenment. And this is really what differentiates at least outwardly, I think only outwardly, but still, the Mahayana path from the Theravada path. In the Theravada path, the focus is, according to them, is in line with what the Buddha said. And I think this is accurate. He said, we have to provide for our own liberation. And the way to do that is focus on our own practice, which is, of course, more than valid. It's appropriate. But, a few hundred years later, thanks to Nagarjuna, we started to think about bodhicitta as a central aspect of the path, meaning that taking the enlightenment of others, the accomplishment of others as even more important than one's own accomplishment is fundamental to one's own accomplishment. It's a little bit of a change of focus, and it is, as you said, one of the key things that all Buddhist teachers in all traditions, but especially in Tibetan Buddhism, in Vajrayana, talk about constantly.
Mm-hmm. And so it can be understood from a lot of different angles and at a lot of different levels, right? So, in general, the way that it's taught is it's the desire to attain enlightenment on behalf of all sentient beings. So it's still an emphasis on our own path. But the reason we're doing it, we're not limiting it to our own happiness and satisfaction because there's this understanding that due to our deep connectivity with everyone else, that's not even really possible. So we have to really think about everyone being happy. Otherwise, we'll never really truly be happy. Is that right?
I think that's well said. I think you've got it. What I think that the Mahayana generally and the attitude of bodhicitta that one is supposed to cultivate sort of gets at is that one doesn't live in a bubble. If you are feeling all jolly about things, but everyone you know is sad about something else, then you will also be drawn down by that. And so it's important that we focus on others, not only for their attainment of enlightenment, so to speak, but for their general well-being and our well-being. It recognizes, I think, this Mahayana attitude of bodhicitta recognizes our interconnectedness and the impossibility of being separate from others on any level. And then by prioritizing others over oneself, then we do two things, right? We increase their likelihood of doing well in all areas and especially on the path, but we also get the focus off ourselves, which, focus on oneself, a self-centered attitude in all of its permutations is the primary cause of suffering in our world. So this has an immediate effect in that we, by focusing on others, we're not worried about our own situation. We disappear into that process, which makes us not only better instruments, but also feel more jolly ourselves. And then also others benefit as well. That's for sure.
Yeah. One thing that came to mind, I'm a special education teacher, so I think a lot about ADHD because majority of my students have that, and I myself have ADHD. And ADHD has to do with the deficiency of the neurotransmitter dopamine. Primarily, it's one of the aspects of ADHD, and dopamine is the neurochemical that allows you to say in sustained attention over a long period of time while achieving a goal. Basically, it's like the chemical of effort, right?
Mm.
And or goal, the rewarding feeling you get from pursuing a goal. And because ADHD people have a deficiency in this, they're well known for hyperactivity is the most common as a way of stimulating yourself constantly to have this feeling of drive that you feel deficient in. But there's lots of other ways you could also fulfill that same drive. And so you might see people have anger problems or daydream a lot, or there's other ways that they can fulfill this dopamine drive. But it seems to me that there's a connection here for all people in that bodhicitta. And when we make these aspirations, when we make a huge aspiration like this, almost unattainable in some ways, it helps train us to stop seeking these short stops. It helps train us to get into something like an effortless effort, is what I've noticed. That by pursuing this goal that we can't really track our progress on very well, it also has this added benefit of teaching us moment by moment. The more you focus on bodhicitta, the more it frees you from this obsession with peaks and valleys. You know, like the path is filled with like tremendous ups and downs. But if you get attached to any one of them, then that can really hamper your progress. If you think you've got it because you had this big peak experience, that can be a distraction. And if you feel down, that can also, you know, and you kind of feel despair and give up, that also is a big danger. So bodhicitta has this really amazing thing that the more you focus on it, the more you get yourself out of this addiction to goal achieving and into the enjoyment of effort. And so this is something I wanted to share because I found it so helpful to my path is just learning how to enjoy effort is so much of what will make you successful in the path and anything else in your life instead of always waiting for the goal. Because anybody who's ever done anything, like if you've ever achieved anything big, like gotten a degree, or it's kind of incredibly disappointing, right? Like you get this maybe a moment of woohoo, maybe, if even that. I don't tend to get that feeling. I tend to be just like, so what, big deal, now what? And so really it's kind of a big letdown if we focus on these goals, but if we instead focus on enjoying the journey and the ride, I think it can be really helpful.
I think that's well said. And these days, due to the circumstances we all find each other in or ourselves in, and the short cutting of all media and so forth, we're all a little bit ADHD, right? We're all looking for the short-term dopamine release. But the
Yeah.
path, as you pointed out very nicely, is very long, right? I'm going to liberate all sentient beings. My gosh, just the thought of it is a little bit, can be not just daunting, but kind of overwhelming. So this is very well said. And I think that this is a good uh, aspect to enhance in one's practice of the path, not a short-term goal, which is impossible when you think about something like what we're talking about here, the Ngondro. The Ngondro takes most people 3-4 years if you're working on it semi part-time, but with a big effort, meaning you're putting in an hour or two every day. That's a long time to be doing something, especially that you're not even going to get a certificate for, right? So you're not going to get any kind of job offers based on your accomplishment of the Ngondro. So to have this attitude that, hey, we're in it for the long haul, and not only in it for the long haul, but we're going to try to shift our appreciation of the path from getting something to doing the path itself is in itself a bodhisattva attitude, you know, and the bodhisattva attitude is bodhicitta. So yeah, I like how you're saying that. Very well. Very
Yeah.
good.
When I remember when I was getting close to finishing my first round of Ngondro, and I could already smell that there was nothing at the end of that, right? Like there's nothing magical that's going to rain down because you did the 100,000, you know. But there's sort of that. There was a kind of almost a subconscious belief, like if I do this, something magic will happen, and certainly magic things did happen, but not like all at once, right? I just noticed that the Dharma had been ingrained into me. But I was talking to Keeling Rinpoche about it, and you know, he's like, I was like, what do most people do when they finish? And he's like, they keep doing it. And you know, so that kind of took the wind out of my sails too, that it was just like, this is just the path, you know. And in the Nyingma school in particular, I think Dzogchen Rinpoche is famous for saying, you know, in other schools, the main practice is the main practice, but in our school, the preliminary practice is the main practice. And so the Ngondro really is the foundation, right? Not just this thing you do before. It's the basis of the whole path. And so getting in it for the long haul and not being so fixated on finishing or the end is really, I think, important.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's very important to think of the Ngondro not as a preliminary to anything, but as the first real stage on the path, right? It is, they do give these huge numbers, which I personally think probably came about simply because someone's saying, well, how many prostrations do I have to do? And the Lama was like, how about 100,000? That'll teach you for asking, and because the numbers are so large and it takes so long, so many days in a row, even if you do it like I've seen Tibetans doing it in monasteries in Tibet, where they knock out, I mean, 3, 4, 5,000 prostrations a day, usually done when they're young, they're pretty hardy, and they're just knocking them out like crazy. Even if you do it like that, you're still in it for a long time, as only to find out at the end that your Lama says, okay, good job. Now just do that again, and then we'll really get started. And so you're right that it takes so long, and the amount of effort is of sustained effort is so massive that what this is teaching one is that on the path, we are going to focus on doing the practice. We're not going to focus on some goal, some outcome. There may be experiences, hopefully everyone's having interesting experiences and opening and a greater degree of love and so forth, and a little more purity in how you see things and so forth. All these things. But the goal of the Ngondro is to learn how to be a practitioner,
Yeah.
and by putting the accumulation of a bodhicitta prayer, which if the Ngondro has 5 parts, then this stands alone as its own thing where you recite over and over, I will work for the benefit of all sentient beings. You're really hammering your self-centered mind into a new angle, into a new way of looking at things, in which you recognize that your own attainment is entirely connected to every other being, whether those beings are, your family members, or they're people you don't know, or they're not even people, they're animals or whatever. And by doing that, you move away from this self-aggrandizing and self-fulfilling goal that almost everything has in our lives. Just as long as I do well, it'll be okay. This is again and again bending things from focusing only on yourself to focusing on others. And with luck, by the end of this, whether it's combined with the refuge, sometimes you do a refuge and bodhicitta prayer while you're prostrating. That's how it is in some of the Choling Tersar Ngondros. And other times it stands alone as a prayer that you accumulate. Whichever way it is, by the end of that, you definitely have a taste of a sense that this is bigger than just me. And that in itself is a kind of accomplishment.
Totally. And when I was doing Ngondro, I really thought of bodhicitta as like I kind of equated it with compassion. And of course, compassion's an element of bodhicitta, but this thing we're talking about, this ability to work towards a goal endlessly, and to train ourselves to be malleable, and getting our brain and mind and body and speech to do what we want it to do, is this other aspect of it that I didn't really fully understand till later, but really is the whole benefit of the Ngondro in a lot of ways, that we're by the end of Ngondro, like doing 2 hours of practice was no big deal for me, because I'd done, you just in the beginning it was so hard, and I remember that feeling of like an hour or two of prostrations and just being like, oh, this sucks. And I know that people feel that way, but just know, just like boot camp in the military or many other things in the world, by the time you're done, you've increased your pain threshold. Your tolerance for difficulty and practice is now permanently raised. And that's an amazing, amazing thing to have happen. Probably for me, the most amazing thing that Ngondro did was just make it like doing long hours of practice is not something I even have to think twice about anymore. Something I enjoy. It's not something painful for me. And that really is thanks to the Ngondro. So knowing that we're like building this tolerance because we're thinking about other sentient beings, but we're also thinking about getting ourselves detached from short-term fulfillment, really is so helpful.
I think that's true. We don't want to, scare people off with this talk about raising our pain thresholds. That is not the purpose of the Ngondro. Don't worry, everyone. If you haven't engaged in this, the Ngondro doesn't have to be painful, but it does take a long time, and it requires an immense amount of commitment. And in a sense, the Bodhisattva vow and the notion of bodhicitta is like the fuel for a lifetime of practice, for not just maybe a lifetime, but however long it takes. This sense that I am committed to the good of all. That is something that most of us don't have, right? I mean, we live in a very selfish society in which one's own well-being and one's own positive outcomes are almost the only thing that's ever discussed. And, you might, of course, you want your kids to do well. They're really part of you. So it's not different, right? But strangers, strangers, that's how people think. This, this tends to help overcome that, to have a broader and more universal mindset. The Ngondro is hard, but the payoff is enormous in that you are really leveling up from a kind of most, not to put people down and not to say anything about myself because I'm so ordinary. It's terrifying, but we want to be distinct from animals, right? Even animals take care of their own young. So that is not like a distinguishing feature of humans. What is possible for humans is a very broad-minded view in which harmlessness, ahimsa, one of the key tenets in Buddhism, is a primary driver of one's actions. That's not the driver now for most people. So there are a lot of things that are being changed as we perform these Ngondro-related practices. And Ngondro itself means preliminary, but what it's really preliminary to is becoming a full-blown human, not preliminary to becoming someone who says other kinds of mantras or does other kinds of higher practices, whatever. Those practices don't even really work unless the Ngondro has had an effect on one's viewpoint such that you have a more universal well-being as your goal. I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, and I want to clarify. The experience of pain threshold that I had to work with in all of this wasn't physical pain. Now there's some of that in prostrations and even in sitting, but really, so a couple of years before I started Ngondro, I was doing like Vipassana, and I would do a 45-minute sit every day, and that was extremely hard for me because it was just so boring, right? Like that, just the ability to do anything for 45 minutes that was basically doing nothing was extremely hard for me. And Ngondro in the same way, doing prostrations for 2 hours, painfully boring. So people, I think, this is a common experience. People try to take on the Ngondro and they find it painfully boring. It's painfully boring to do 100,000 of almost anything, much less these tasks that can be require some level of mental engagement and physical engagement that we need some. And so it really is an exercise. And, they suggest in all the texts that our retreats be shaped like a grain of rice. So I recommend this for Ngondro as well, a little less in the beginning and you work up to more and more and more. But know that the difficulty of it has a purpose. It's not just difficult because we want to make you do something hard. You, like I said, that we actually are training ourselves to be able to do these things, making our mind and body malleable, so that, as you just said, these higher practices are workable because our mind and body have become workable through training ourselves to tolerate sustained attention and sustained dedicated effort towards this goal.
I think that's absolutely right. There's also an aspect, especially in the bodhicitta, of becoming more sensitive, I think. We are, because our world requires us to think about winning all the time, even if you're just applying for a job, there are other people applying. You have to defeat them, in a sense, in order to get that job. There's just this competitive sort of aspect to so much of our lives. I think one key outcome of contemplating the necessity for other beings to be well, for you also to be well, the equivalency of ourselves and others in that way, is that it permeates all parts of your life, and it doesn't permeate any parts of our life right now. Even you know, the what we would think of in America, a basically Christian nation, the Christian outlook seems to be completely devoid of activity here in America, and we just have no exposure to that. And this is kind of, as I said before, we're kind of attempting to remake ourselves in a more complete way, such that every aspect of our lives can be beneficial to others. It isn't only about hoping that other people get enlightened or something like vague. It's about how we, in our undertaking of this human life, can benefit others and can bring about uh, well-being wherever we go. We want to be the type of person who, in any situation, is an advantage and not a disadvantage. And so many of us are a disadvantage on so many levels all the time. So this is a process of that. And the bodhicitta is specifically about that. For ordinary people like us, the primary aspect of bodhicitta is aspirational. I will attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings. This is a long-term goal, and it isn't just only focused on, during this session, I'm going to do it or something like that. We're remaking our entire view of ourselves as participants in a worldwide society. We're not just moving through this because, hey, this is what's required in order to move up to a higher level or get secret teachings or other kinds of baloney that you know don't have as much value as people might think they do. The real value is in actually becoming a bodhisattva, a person who thinks about others before themselves. And that doesn't happen overnight. It takes many repetitions. Unfortunately, a lot more than 100,000. But this gives one a taste and allows one to move forward in this way so that the rest of the Ngondro and the rest of one's practice life, which becomes, increasingly the practice permeates all aspects of your life. It isn't that you just, we do, as you practice more for longer periods, then you tend to practice longer periods each day. That does happen for most people. But the goal is actually that you, in a sense, you never get up off your cushion, right? You're always engaged in the well-being of others, whether you're driving on the street or you are at the grocery store or you're at work or you're interacting with your extended family. All the time, it becomes for many people, for myself, I think this happened. For the first time in my life, I realized, like, geez, I don't have to be the center. And that's something amazing until actually it's involuntary and that you're not the center as much. And that's definitely a positive outcome of these practices.
And there's, in an addition, in linking to this, a very precise reason why we need to take bodhicitta as a aspiration before we do our practice sessions, because the Buddha was very clear that our life is the result of karma, and karma is the result of our intentions. And because our intentions are so habitually self-centered and selfish, that if we don't turn the boat every time we do these actions and every time we do anything, hopefully, then we'll keep going the wrong direction. And so this is really training ourselves how to steer the boat karmically as well, right? We're putting
Absolutely.
in this intention and karmic energy in this new direction, and we have to turn the tide. And it's no small feat.
Yeah, you're right. I think of it as turning a huge ship whenever I think about this. I've never been on a cruise ship, but they're massive, right? They're like 800 meters long, something. You can't just turn the wheel and then expect to turn like you do in a car. You have to turn it, and then over time, there's a change in the direction. This is the same thing. Our karmic pattern, as you pointed out very nicely, is one of enriching ourselves and defeating enemies, this kind of energy. And what we're really doing here is the opposite. We're really going to be like, what I have that's good, I'm going to present to the world, and what I have that's negative, I'm going to curtail. I'm going to suppress. Suppress is a little funny, but I'm going to purify. And the whole of the Ngondro is about these two things of purifying tendencies toward selfishness while increasing tendencies toward toward goodness in a general sense. And it's a replacement of everything that got us into this situation. Everything, our entire lives, our births and so forth, according to Buddhist teaching, is because of past actions ripening. And when past actions ripen, we get a choice at that moment. We can either accept, I see, this is the past coming to fruition. I can allow that and not fight against it, or I can use it as a new cause to be even more selfish, in which case our spiral goes downward. And then what we're really trying to do is continually spiral upward, because we're going to be again and again experiencing the same kind of events, the same kind of situations. And our tendency is to do the same thing we did last time. So by proclaiming out loud, I'm working for the benefit of others, I'm working for the benefit of others, I'm working for the benefit of others, sooner or later, similar to like the practice of dream yoga. And the dream yoga practice, during the day, you think, am I dreaming? Am I dreaming? You check, right? And that carries over into your dream, such that when you are in a dream, if you have that tendency to ask, am I dreaming? It becomes more obvious in a dream because everything is a little kooky in a dream. In the same way, when these situations appear again, rather than just the same old responsiveness, which tends to lead us even to be more and more selfish, we think, wait a minute. This morning, I spent 2 hours saying how I was going to work for the benefit of others. I got a chance to do it right now. The first time that happens in one's practice, you really feel like this is working. And that really turns people into real live Buddhists, as opposed to just Buddhists in name.
And there's so much potency in this practice. It's so well thought out and so amazing, because like the Buddha has also explained, and I have found this also to be true, that karma is stronger depending on certain circumstances, right? So in the presence of symbols of the Buddha, your teachers, etc., karma is enhanced, right? So good and bad actions are also increased because of the presence of holy beings. Similarly, your parents, or different things that have more significant symbolic meaning to you, enhance the level of your karma. So by visualizing this refuge tree containing symbols of every aspect of the Dharma, while we make this vow that I am going to commit myself to benefiting all sentient beings over and over again, we're creating this massive energy. And I think it's helpful for people to understand that that's what they're doing. They're not just reciting empty words. We're taking a vow. We're committing ourselves again and again in the presence of these powerful symbols and beings, in order that we might be able to change this long-standing karmic energy of countless lifetimes of serving ourselves. And so we've taken refuge. We've gone onto this island where we're now refugees under the Buddha's care. And the Buddha says, okay, now you understand, like, samsara sucks. You've finally woken up to that fact. And so now here I will, is this little place of protection. Now let me show you how to get the hell out of here. And so the bodhicitta is the first step, really, once you've taken refuge, to start to change everything. It really is this like momentous vow that I'm not going to serve myself anymore as the only thing that matters. And it is so potent and so powerful. And it just becomes like, the more you do it and the more you experience it, the more you realize how amazing it is to even have that thought, that how rare a thought it is.
How rare it is. Yeah, this is the true, this is the birth of a new kind of human inside of this half animal, half human that is called, in my case, Joseph Wagner. A new type of human with a more vast attitude. One who realizes to some degree, hopefully ever increasing, that it's not just that we're being really nice by wanting other people to do this, but we are other people. They are us, in a very deep way. And this is, it's almost like realizing that you're chained to everyone. Like you're on a chain gang and nobody's getting free unless everybody's getting free. That's the final statement. And that's, I personally think this is why the Mahayana is philosophically and even emotionally much more powerful than the Theravada views as they're normally presented by the Mahayana. Inside of Theravada, they have very similar ideas. We're not attacking the Theravada, of course. All these teachings are teachings of the Buddha. But when we make a distinction, as soon as you realize, like, wait a minute, it's not just that I'm connected to some people, it's that I am everyone. And that anyone's pain is my pain. This, we have a threat, we have a kind of a curtain that blocks us from noticing this. And bodhicitta is about first piercing through that curtain and finally removing it to some degree, maybe entirely, and until you become like someone like Garchen Rinpoche, whose happiness is not, I wouldn't say dependent, but is in relation to everyone. And you feel it when you see him. I mean, he has a big screen when he teaches. And on it are all the people who have their cameras on who are watching, right? There's little squares for everyone. And you can see him with this eyes. So he's looking like this at each person. And even if your camera isn't on, and even if the squares are this big, you feel like he's looking right at you, like he cares about you. And this is the attitude we're trying to bring about through the Bodhisattva practice as it is in the Bodhicitta section.
Yeah, it's so true. And you know what's even true is that really, like, I'm still a Hinayana practitioner. Most of the time, like, Hinayana is more like us, right? Like, we're still practicing for ourselves. You know, we're still worried about our life and we're worried about our attainment. We're worried about all kinds of things that are still I oriented. To actually be a Mahayana practitioner is insane. Like, to actually be to the place where you're not doing any of this, including your Dharma practice, for your own benefit, is an achievement that's almost unthinkable, because we are so selfish. It's like most of us get into the Dharma on some kind of self-help train, right? Like, we realize that this place sucks and we're trying to find a way to not have it suck so bad. But even once you get into the Buddha Dharma and it does help, like, things start sucking so bad, it's really hard to still like shift off ourselves and not keep turning this into a Hinayana path, really, more than, like, you know, a Southeast Asian Buddhist school. To me, Hinayana is a lesser motivation that is we're all really susceptible to.
Uh, you got it. That's absolutely right. I mean, all of us are in, to use the term that you used, which is the right term here, Hinayana. We're lesser vehicle. Just as long as my kayak gets out of this, out of this trouble spot, I'll be okay. The thing is, we're all in the same kayak. And in fact, the most basic teachings of the Buddha are that there is no self. Anatta, no self-doctrine, right? So there's not even anyone to protect. And in looking through that, when so to speak, when you look toward trying to isolate and identify this self, you see only others. And that's a kind of a wonderful thing. And that's what this is really about. And as soon as that starts to happen, then you become a bodhisattva in your actions as well as your aspirations, at least to some degree.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you about bodhicitta. We could go on forever about this subject, and it really is amazing. And the place to start is always the way of the Bodhisattva, right? If you want to learn more about bodhicitta, that's the text. So we'll be back next time. We'll be talking about Vajrasattva practice, which is also so excellent. And I'm so glad you're here with us. Please subscribe and share our videos if you find them helpful and meaningful. You made it this far in the podcast. That helps our little engine that could go a little bit further. And been so great to be with you, and we'll see you again soon.